Hello and welcome to the Empowerment versus Care debate. Our scenario stated that the pursuit of self-sufficiency and independence is highly valued in our society and is reflected in many legislative laws and funding initiatives associated with individuals with disabilities. Despite such efforts, research findings support the fact that individuals with disabilities are not afforded the same opportunities as those without disabilities in determining their post-school choices and outcomes. Instead, people with disabilities, especially those with severe disabilities, find themselves trapped in a system of care where the post-school choices are determined by others because of barriers related to attitudes, funding, rehabilitation, and healthcare. On the other side, service providers are concerned with issues related to liability and service provision. We are now going to meet the debaters. My name is Gabrielle Scragg, and I am the stater for the empowerment side.
My name is Jude Gullion, and I'm the stater for the care side.
My name is Kristen Stahl, and I am the prover for the empowerment side.
My name is Marcella Sandoval, and I am the prover for the care side.
My name is Paula Ward, and I am the attacker for the empowerment side. And again, my name is Paula Ward, and I'm also the attacker for the care side.
I'm now going to talk about why empowering individuals with disabilities to make their own choices and decisions in regards to post-school activities is more ethical than service providers making those choices for them. Before I begin, I'm going to go over some key terms that are relevant to the empowerment side of the debate. The first term is empowerment. Empowerment is the right, power, or authority to perform various acts or duties. The next term is quality of life, which is a critical measure of treatment outcome for people with mental and physical health concerns. Next is self-determination theory. This theory maintains that an understanding of human motivation requires a consideration of innate psychological needs for competence, autonomy, and relatedness. I will now go over terms relevant to self-determination theory. The first one is competence. Competence is a quality or state of having sufficient knowledge, judgment, skill, or strength as for a particular duty or in a particular respect. Next is autonomy, which is the quality or state of being self-governing. Last is relatedness. Relatedness can be defined as connected by reason of an established or discoverable relation. I will now go over key points in research that highlight why empowering individuals with disabilities is the more ethical option. First, according to Martinez and Wright, taking away the basic human right of making life choices has a negative impact on one's physical and mental health. Also, according to Burgess and Gutstein, having the option to make choices and having opportunities for independence enhance an individual's quality of life. Martinez also says that individuals with disabilities that have self-determination are more likely to have greater independence, employment, and quality of life. Sjogren, Waymeyer, Palmer, Reifenbarg, and Little found that individuals with disabilities that have high self-determination have greater community access and employment than individuals that have a lower self-determination. I will now reference the core ethical principles in the Behavior Analyst Certification Board's ethical compliance codes to build the case for empowerment. The 9 core ethical principles require that we respect individuals' autonomy and dignity. The ethical principles also require that we are just when we deliver treatment to an individual. Many of the Behavior Analyst Certification Board's ethical compliance codes support and require the empowerment of individuals with disabilities. To summarize the empowerment side of the debate, I would like to say that the Behavior Analyst Certification Board has a number of professional and ethical compliance codes that require the behavior analyst to empower their client and involve them in the planning and consent to their own programming. While individuals with disabilities may not be as proficient in independent skills as their neurotypical peers, empowering them to make their own choices in regards to post-school activities remains the more beneficial and ethical option than service providers making those choices for them. I will now hand it over to Jude, who is the care stater.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I will discuss the care side of the debate. The care key terms are effective care. It refers to the delivery of care or services that show evidence of reduced risks of relevant and important clinical outcomes, such as disease or injury. Ethics of care may be summarized by the following 6 features. Benefice is the attempt to do good by acting in the best interest of the individual. Non-malfeasance is avoiding and reducing harm to the individual and their family. Respect is respecting their autonomy, individuality, and confidentiality. Integrity refers to acting honestly when reporting on and assisting individuals. Compliance refers to the imperative to work within legal and ethical boundaries. And competence refers to operating within one's scope to assist others. Protective guidance refers to guiding individuals to make choices when they have potential to make harmful treatment decisions contrary to their best interests. So when we're talking about the care model, we're talking about individuals who do not have the ability to make those decisions by themselves. Some of the key points are supported decision making. That is the process where individuals with disabilities use trusted family, friends, or professionals to make important decisions they would otherwise be unable to make alone. The individual makes all the final decisions regarding service, provider, and key elements. The authorization may be revoked by the individual at any time. Guardianship is a legal appointment made by a judge where an individual's loved one or court-appointed designee makes legal decisions for a person who is deemed incapable of doing so. Guardianship may be partial for specific areas such as financial or medical, where the individual still retains some rights in other areas. Full guardianship is appointed when individuals are deemed incapable of making any decisions. Guardianship can be restored, but is typically lifelong. An example of a person who has a medical guardianship is someone who has power of attorney. This may be used short-term, like when someone goes into the hospital for a procedure. They might make their spouse their power of attorney. Someone with a serious medical disability, however, should have a medical guardian in place at all times in case they have an emergency. For example, an adult living with an active seizure disorder should have a designated person to make decisions in the event that they are unable to make those choices for themselves or do not have the capability to understand their choices. This would really come into play if an individual who is experiencing a bipolar swing decides that they don't want to take their seizure medication that day, despite having active seizures. Or when an adult with autism feels overwhelmed by hospitals, so they refuse to get in an ambulance if they break their foot. An example of a guardian is someone who may be the parent or the relative of an individual who helps make all important decisions. A guardian may also be court-appointed if the individual doesn't have a relative to take on that role. This is often necessary in situations where an individual has moderate to severe intellectual disability and does not possess the cognitive abilities to make choices about living arrangements, medical services, or finances. There are several disadvantages to giving up one's legal rights and having an appointed guardian, however. The person may no longer vote, own a weapon, or serve in the military. There are a lot of health concerns associated with people living on the autism spectrum. Some of those comorbidities are epilepsy and seizures, sleep disorders and disturbances, ADHD, gastrointestinal disorders, feeding and eating challenges, obesity, anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder. The CDC estimates that about 10% of children with ASD also have Down syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, tuberous sclerosis, or other chromosomal disorders. Obviously, these are lifelong disorders that will follow them into adulthood. The CDC also showed in a population of over 16,000 youth with ASD that 35% had an intellectual disability of below 70%, and 25 were considered to be in the borderline range between 71 to 85, while the remaining 44% had an average or above average IQ of 86 and higher. To quote Ava Feder-Ketty, "Yet despite the achievement of the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act itself, and the opportunities it has opened, I believe that there is much problematic in an approach that extols independence as the route to a dignified life and sees dependence as a degeneration of the person. I worry that the emphasis on independence extols the adulation that is a mere fiction, not only for people with disability, but for all of us. The emphasis on choice leaves out many people with disabilities for whom making choices is problematic, as their cognitive function may be seriously impaired. And the degeneration of people in dependency tends towards the attitude that makes the work and value of the carers invisible, thus creating one oppression in the effort to alleviate the another. The care model emphasizes the support of loved ones and service providers. Adults transitioning from the public school to adult age services should make all the decisions they are capable of making. However, it is not often possible for adults living with autism who have lower cognitive function. The loved ones, guardians, and service providers should always work diligently to include the individual in the decision-making process whenever possible. The care model comes into play where the ability to make choices stops. The reality is that many adults who remain in adult disability services need guidance. Supported decision-making is the process where we put the individual's needs and interests first to assist them in having a happy and healthy life. The Quality of Life Questionnaire was given to 75 individuals with high-functioning autism and 28 typically developing young adults ages 18 to 28 in the Netherlands. The questionnaire measured the different facets of what it took to have an independent and happy life. The study determined that satisfaction, empowerment and independence, and social belonging, community, and integration were most important. Even the individuals with high-functioning autism who were used in this study still lack significantly in these three areas compared to their same-aged peers. Participants noted that anxiety, daily executive functioning, and emotional processing were their biggest barriers to leading what they considered independent and happy lives. As you can see, there is a clear breakdown in even the ability for individuals with high-functioning autism to manage their own lives. Medication management, transportation, living arrangements, paying rent and utilities, groceries and nutrition, receiving and managing disability services, safety awareness, and more are all issues that adults with autism may struggle with. This is especially true for those with moderate to severe intellectual disabilities. The care model is highly suggestive for those individuals who need guidance in making important day-to-day and long-term decisions. Next, we will hear from my partner, Kristen, on the research supporting the empowerment side of the debate.
Hi, my name is Kristen, and I am the prover for the empowerment side, and I will be providing an overview and discussion about the research that we have found supporting our empowerment arguments. The first research that we came across was a famous and groundbreaking experiment in the late 1970s. And it indicated just how powerful the positive effects of control over one's life and the negative effects of lack of such control can be. The study included elderly residents in a nursing home, and they rated themselves as having been provided very good care overall, and they were divided into two groups. One group both groups were given a plant, and one group had a staff person making the decisions for how to take care of the plant and were ultimately responsible for taking care of the plant themselves. And then the other group was given their own ability to make choices and control their own environment for their plant and to take care of their plant themselves without the help from staff. In the control, the group without being able to make decisions for themselves, 71% were rated as having become more debilitated over a period of time as short as 3 weeks. In the contrast with this group, 93% of the people who were encouraged to make decisions for themselves, given decisions to make, and given responsibility for something outside of themselves, actually showed overall improvement. They became more active and felt happier. And Wright quotes that so weak a manipulation had any effect suggests how important increased control is for these people, for whom decision-making is virtually non-existent. And another form of research that we came across that supports empowerment has to do with quality of life. And Vertigo in 2005 stated that generally agreed upon domains of adult quality of life are interpersonal relationships, social inclusion, personal development, physical well-being, rights, environment, family, recreation and leisure, and safety security. In their longitudinal study of 48 children diagnosed with autism, McGovern and Sigmund found that it was not IQ that predicted the better functioning, but the quality of emotional engagement with peers. Their study, among others, has neither supported the common assumption that IQ is related to good outcome, nor that IQ is a predictor of quality of life. Our next form of research that supports our empowerment arguments was given from Martinez in 2015 and Waymeyer in 2005. And it talks about, as research has consistently shown, people with disabilities who are encouraged and supported to make their own decisions to act as primary causal agents are better employed at higher salaries and more independent. Accessed and used appropriately, VR supports and services focused on employment-based self-determination and independent living skills can empower young adults with disabilities to protect and exercise their right to make choices, helping them become poised and prepared to lead full and independent lives, free from overbroad or undue guardianship. And these findings suggest that self-determination status upon exiting high school predicts positive outcomes in the domains of achieving employment and community access 1 year post-school, and that exposure to self-determination interventions in secondary school may lead to more stability in student outcomes over time. Next, I will talk about some of the core ethical principles that support empowerment. The first one is respect autonomy, and Kuchar and Keith Spiegel state that when describing respect autonomy, they state, individuals have the right to decide how to live their lives as long as their actions do not interfere with the rights and welfare of others. Respect for autonomy is accepted by the mental health professionals because the underlying goal of psychotherapy and counseling is often to move those with whom we work toward a greater self-reliance and self-determination. And this supports individuals making their own decisions about their lives, away from any biases of other people that might have control over their guardianship. And as behavior analysts, we always want to support the client that is being most affected by the treatment to having access to their own decisions more so than anyone else. And the next core ethical principle that talks about and supports empowerment is accord dignity. This states that mental health professionals should view those with whom we work as worthy of respect. We must strive to understand cultural and other ways that people differ from ourselves and to eliminate biases that might have an impact on the quality of our work. So this could come into effect when a third party or anyone with guardianship over the client has cultural beliefs or any biases that differ from the actual individual themselves. This could come into effect with medical beliefs or gender identity, sexuality, really a broad range of different aspects of people's lives that could have a detrimental effect if the individual does not have a say in these matters. Next, I will talk about the BACB Professional and Ethical Compliance Code for Behavior Analysts, and the codes that support empowerment for the clients that we serve. The first code is 2.04D, Third-Party Involvement in Services. And it states that behavior analysts put the client's care above all others, and should the third party make requirements for services that are contraindicated by the behavior analyst's recommendations, behavior analysts are obligated to resolve such conflicts in the best interest of the client. If said conflict cannot be resolved, that behavior analyst service to the client may be discontinued following appropriate transition. So this kind of follows in what I was talking about in the last slide. If a third party has certain ideas for a client's care or treatment that contradict what a behavior analyst and what the client thinks is best for the client's life, they need to do their best to resolve that conflict in the best interest of the client. And if this cannot be resolved, then this may result in the client losing services, and that would be very detrimental to the client if he cannot get services due to a third party's decisions. The next BACB code that supports empowerment is 3.03, Behavior Analytic Assessment Consent. Prior to conducting an assessment, behavior analysts must explain to the client the procedures to be used, who will participate, and how the resulting information will be used. Behavior analysts must obtain the client's written approval of the assessment procedures before implementing them. So this could come into effect if a client has a guardian that makes decisions for them, provides written approval for a treatment that the client does not necessarily agree with, but may not be able to have the power to communicate those feelings or personal values. The next code that supports empowerment is code 4.02, involving clients in planning and consent. Behavior analysts involve the client in planning of and consent for behavior change programs. And this would also fall into that same field of if a guardian supported and gave consent to a program that an individual inside felt was detrimental to their life or that they did not agree with at all. Next, I will talk about the legal statute on consent. To give consent, a person should be able to understand the facts and consequences relative to a decision and manifest that decision voluntarily. Thus, it is a decision one makes for oneself. Furthermore, to give consent, a person must be considered competent and be the legal age of 18. Permission is a proxy consent wherein a parent or guardian acts in the best interest of their child or ward by making decisions on their behalf. And this was given by Kucher and Keith Spiegel in 1990. Next, I will turn the discussion over to Marcella, who is the prover for the care side.
Thank you, Kristen. Hi, my name is Marcella, and I am the prover for the care side, and I will be discussing research supporting care for individuals with intellectual disabilities. The article by Kate, 2011, discusses an individual's autonomy or their right to make their own decisions, particularly in the case of individuals with intellectual disabilities. In order for autonomy to be possible over one's own life, an individual must be able to care for oneself. If this isn't an attainable goal and must still rely on others, then they do not possess that ability and they lack autonomy. That is where support for the individuals is necessary, as they are not able to make the necessary decisions over their own life. As Kate mentions in the article, when individuals find themselves dependent on others for self-care, economic security, and safety, the dignity that comes with autonomy appears threatened. Most individuals with disabilities lack the necessary executive functions, such as self-monitoring, sustaining attention skills, organizing, or planning skills that are necessary for self-management. Most individuals with intellectual disabilities also lack the skill which holds them back from sustaining an independent living situation with little to no support from others. These ideas of interdependence resonate with definitions put forward by disabled people's movements, which frame autonomy as a matter of control rather than simply as isolated independence, as mentioned in Williams and Porter 2017. In order for one to have autonomy over their lives, they must be able to not only make their own decisions, but also sustain an independent way of living. Although there are individuals with intellectual disabilities who are capable of higher quality of life, they are still in need of support and programs accessible to them in order to attain such support. As mentioned in Post et al.'s article 2013, those caring for the people along the autism are challenged to find the right balance between respecting the experiences of a loved one with autism on its own terms, as it presents itself, and trying to encourage a loved one to achieve certain thresholds of social, emotional, and intellectual competence. Although individuals caring for those with disabilities attempt to encourage independence and autonomy, there is still a sense of need to assist those individuals in making the correct decision that will ultimately be beneficial for them. Next, I will be discussing the ethical codes from the BACB professional and ethical compliance codes for behavior analysts, which support the care side. Ethical Code 2.03a consultation states that behavior analysts arrange for appropriate consultations and referrals based principally on the best interests of their clients, with appropriate consent and subject to other relevant considerations, including applicable law and contractual obligations, as mentioned in the Board Analyst Certification Board 2016. Individuals with intellectual disabilities need that consultation from individuals that are able to provide them with the right tools to make those decisions. The next ethical code that supports client care is Ethical Code 4.03a, Individualized Behavior Change Programs, which states that behavior analysts must tailor behavior change programs to the unique behaviors, environmental variables, assessment results, and goals of each client. I will be discussing the legal statutes on incompetency that supports client care. The article by Quinn et al. 2005 states that legally you are either competent or not, meaning if there is even a slight belief of incompetence, one is considered unable to do much of anything. It is important for those that are unable to sustain themselves to have someone there to advocate for them and assist in making the best decisions for them. As Quinn et al. 2005 states, guardianship need not be an all or nothing. Why not limit the power of guardian in accordance with the specific needs of the person with diminished capacity? And now I will hand it off to Paula, which will be focusing on the attacking both empowerment and care side.
Thank you, Marcella. Our CARE colleague cited Freeman's 2013 article. Freeman makes a good case for the imbalance of power as it pertains to the lack of supports and services to enable empowerment, which can bolster the argument for the need of the care model. However, the care model will only uphold the status quo on the lack of services without any effect for real change. The more we empower our youth, the more they can advocate for the services they individually need and to seek out social networks. This in turn can create more social awareness and social validity for more resources. Leonard, in 2016, found that although there is a gap between the best practice of empowerment and real-world societal structures, the necessity for empowering transitioning youth to promote positive outcomes is paramount. As you can see in this slide, in 2017, the United States Government Accountability Office, in order to support social societal demands for empowerment and least restrictive environments, recommends that federal agencies should take further action to fund and promote the programs found in Table 1. If the medical or care model were still being promoted on the federal level, only a fraction of those programs would be considered for funding. Some providers and researchers, such as Kittay's 2011 study, advocate for the care model because, and I quote, "It is a vision of society that can account for the inevitable dependency relationships between unequals." However, Kittay's views and the care model itself can be construed as ableist. It looks more at what is wrong with an individual than really understanding what that individual may need or want. Yes, dependence on others may be necessary at times, but we must get rid of the notion that dependency or dependence precludes agency. Well-being intertwines with self-determination with or without a need for specialized services or support. To demonstrate this, Ho and Eves in 2008 found that 60% within their study of young adults with ASD that the participants had better outcomes in correlation to higher percentages of self-agency. As cited by the care side, the 2017 Williams and Porter paper argued that choice and control within the empowerment movement has been modeled on a widespread consumerist model of choice, as if choice is a novel concept derived from capitalism. They further proclaim that this can be a bewildering and time-consuming to those with intellectual abilities. Yet, Williams and Porter's own findings do not support their hypothesis. Participants that were members of self-advocacy groups, which, by the way, are based on the social model of empowerment and choice, had less anxiety about self-identity and had more confidence to seek changes in the structures around them. Furthermore, Williams and Porter's use a definition of choice that is hugely flawed. In 1979, Brigham, a well-respected behaviorist, defined choice as the opportunity to make an uncoerced selection from two or more alternative events, consequences, or responses. By uncoerced, we mean that there are no programmed implicit or explicit consequences for selecting one alternative over the others except for the characteristics of the alternatives themselves. Choice is being free from coercion. That is the definition that is better suited to this debate. My colleague on the care side also used Kim's 2019 study to support their position. However, Kim's study does not support the care position at all. In fact, the researchers' findings concluded that self-determination underlines the participants' ability to enhance their social participation and learning, to actively pursue valued employment, to develop positive self-identities, to seek appropriate healthcare services, to create a stable social environment, and to engage in personal development. Another questionable defense for the care position is the Stony Brook guidelines. Some questions have been raised about post-2012 findings in the Stony Brook guidelines. Milton in 2014 noted that the guidelines were written without any direct input from those who have autism and that the guidelines were written solely within the medical model. The guidelines themselves may be unethical because the writing of them was not truly participatory or representative of the ASD community as a whole. My teammate Kristen made a strong defense for empowerment by highlighting the core principles and ethical codes that pertain to this issue. Many of the behavioral analytical ethical codes relating to client treatment and rights have roots that trace back to the Wyatt versus Stickney court case, which was seminal to disability rights. It also led to research study concerning the importance of self-autonomy and choice that has come since. Laws inspired by Wyatt helped establish civil rights for the disabled. Such rights include the right to treatment and the right to refuse treatment. Beyond that, the Wyatt mandate of a right to treatment in the least restrictive environment is echoed in the Americans with Disabilities Act. And as you can see on this slide, Wyatt versus Stickney also led to the Patient Bill of Rights, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Mental Health Systems Act, Protection and Advocacy of Individuals with Mental Illness Act, Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act, and as I mentioned before, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. I have now concluded my attack on the care side on the empowerment side, and will now start the attack on against the empowerment side. Sorry. The empowerment team made a sound argument and provided a robust conceptual model to advocate self-autonomy for those with disabilities with Martinez's 2015 study. However, a closer examination reveals very little empirical support. Furthermore, the primary research cited by the opposing team to support the significant negative impact of loss of autonomy and lack of empowerment are similar literature reviews. For example, Silsman's 2010 article and Wright's 2010 paper offer limited quantitative or qualitative data. Broadening the investigation of the research literature creates a warren of studies that rely heavily on case law, hypothesis, or antiquated research. In illustration, Wright's 2010 paper presents one qualitative study and two quantitative studies from 4 decades prior in order to support the efficacy of autonomy. This is problematic when trying to establish subjective well-being and the necessity of empowerment to the current issues of today. Additionally, the opposing team noted that IQ is not a predictor of quality of life, which is true, and the various domains of quality of life were also commented upon. However, what was not remarked upon was how all these components interact with one another. Changes in one domain can induce changes in another domain for better or worse. While empowerment and consent, choice, and individualism are important domains for quality of life, they are still only subdomains. If basic needs are not being met, that directly impacts all the domains of life, such as physical well-being, material well-being, and social well-being. Petrie and fellow researchers in 2005 found that individuals with profound disabilities, in order to gratify their needs on several domains of quality of life, needed a secure relationship with a sensitive, responsive parent and direct support staff to make decisions on their behalf. Additionally, quality of life has both eidetic and emic properties. That is to say, while there is a general theoretical consensus that the quality of life domains in all of its dimensions are generally represented within all populations, the significance that is attached to the domains differ for the different groups of people, based on their own experience and frame of reference. For example, Klaus in 2010 and Boyd in 2009 established that those with profound needs have reported that the lack of caregivers and adequate supports to address basic physical and material needs have more impact to the quality of life than self-determination. An example of this would be a 1998 case study from England provided by Crichton. In this study, an elderly man who is severely disabled chooses not to eat and risks losing his place in a group home and being sent back to a more restrictive environment where he may have been sexually abused. This is where the right to treatment and the right to personal liberties becomes conflictive. The patient in this case study will lose his right to the least restrictive environment by his right to make the bad choice not to eat. How is this effective treatment? Other members of society may have the right to choose to not eat lunch, but they typically have the skill set to meet the contingencies to sustain their own life. The empowerment tacker mentioned governmental call for support services, but where is the funding? Empowerment for self-determination is all well and good, but becomes a moot point if societal resources, supports, and opportunities are so limited that they become unachievable. If the opportunity is not there, then one cannot take advantage of it. There are limited opportunities for leisure and occupational roles for those with ASD or other disabilities, with or without parental guardianship. McNair and Rush in 1991 found that the most significant barrier to transitioning youth is lack of funding and special programs. Being a primary causal agent to one's own life is almost impossible if there are limited choices in which to exert control. The availability of supported employment varies geographically and often lacks funding. Additionally, state and local funding for assessment and provision of equipment and independent living support make it difficult for young people to become empowered in any sense of the word. Another point not well made by the opposing team is that when evaluating self-determination and choice-making, one must ask if it provides real and meaningful options. Collins suggests that individuals with disabilities make few or real meaningful choices in their lives. If choice interventions are providing alternatives, or if choices are options of which none are highly preferred, then choice-making opportunities may have no real meaning for that individual. Therefore, they are not being truly self-determinate or being empowered. The empowerment attacker brought up White versus Stickney. This law case revolves around the right to rehabilitation, and not at one point was there mention on the empowerment side how funding for such programs is dependent on teaching independent living skills. Yet what happens when a client chooses to play on their iPad rather than learning the skills necessary to live as independently as possible? What if they tried to use an oven without having been taught how? Do they understand the consequences of their behavior? Are they incompetent?